I remember years ago being in Bible college. I shouldn't say Bible college. I went to a Christian college for undergrad. One day before class, having a very lively conversation outside on a bench with a number of my fellow students about Mystery Babylon. And is it possible that America could be the Mystery Babylon mentioned in the book of Revelation? Probably the most distinct memory I have about this conversation is that no one opened a Bible the entire time. There was a whole lot of guessing, a whole lot of summarizing, a whole lot of, well, I think this means that, and I think I remember it says this. But if I'm being honest, I don't know if anybody in that group even knew where Mystery Babylon is mentioned in the book of Revelation. All that to say, our first question today on Bible Q&A has to do with Mystery Babylon, and I feel much more equipped to answer it than I would have back then, all those years ago when I was in college. You're watching and listening to That You May Know Him, illuminating biblical truth and applying it to faith, life, and culture. I'm happy to be back with you once again for another edition of the show. This is episode 275 of That You May Know Him. I have 3 questions that were submitted to our ministry over the past several weeks that I'm going to answer today. And then if there are any in the live chat when I'm done, I will take those as well. But to kick this thing off, let's go to our first question of the day, which comes from Jason, who asks, do you believe that America could be Mystery Babylon mentioned in Revelation 17? And could you please explain the reasons why some people do and don't believe that? And so I'm going to do my best to answer Jason's question in its entirety. What Jason is referring to is a passage from, as he mentioned, Revelation 17, where we see the great prostitute and the scarlet beast. 2 of these very profound figures in Revelation are both about to be judged. Now, both of these are highly symbolic figures, as most of the book of Revelation is also highly symbolic, as is almost all apocalyptic literature, which is the genre to which the book of Revelation belongs. Apocalyptic literature was a popular style of writing, a popular genre in and around the 1st century. I would say the couple of centuries leading up to the 1st century, and for a couple of centuries after, this was a popular style of writing. I shouldn't say it was popular, but this is the time period in which apocalyptic literature was mostly written. It's very, very symbolic. Almost nothing in apocalyptic literature is meant to be taken literally. And in this case, both the great prostitute and the scarlet beast, I believe, represent tangible things that existed in the 1st century. But of course, they're not literal. They're not literal figures. There's not a literal beast with 7 heads that I think we should look for to rise up out of the ocean and more or less deceive the nations, either now or in the future. And I don't think there was one in the 1st century either. The scarlet beast has, as I just mentioned, 7 heads and is thought by most scholars, at least the good ones in my opinion, to represent the Roman Empire, or the spirit of all evil empires throughout history. I think it could represent both. I think it represents the Roman Empire specifically when we're talking about the 1st century context of Revelation and the people to whom it was written originally. But also, I think the 7-headed beast represents this theme, this pattern, this type that we see all through human history, really. The spirit of all evil empires, those empires which rise and fall. I think the question we're going to get to really is, could America be one of those empires? I mean, when we really boil it all down, but let's not jump the gun. We'll get there in just a second. Many people have asked, let me say this. Riding on the beast in Revelation 17 is the great prostitute, and on her forehead is written a mysterious name. Revelation 17:5 says, let me go back to verse 4. So starting in Revelation 17:4, the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written the name of a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. Before this, in verse 3, it says, and he, that being the angel who's speaking to John, carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns, that being the beast, not the woman. And I'm pretty sure of that because we see a 7-headed beast earlier in the book of Revelation. So just to be clear, we have a beast with 7 heads, that's scarlet, and on the beast's back is this woman arrayed in all this fine clothing and gold, and she's drinking out of a golden cup, which is said to be full of abominations, impurities, and her own sexual immorality. See how Revelation is symbolic? I mean, these things are not meant to be taken literally. The thing we have to ask ourselves is, what do these symbols represent? And on the forehead of the prostitute is written the name of a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of earth's abomination. So many people have asked this question over the years. Could she represent America, since her name is said to be a mystery? She's Babylon the Great, but not literally Babylon the Great. It's this mysterious Babylon. That's where we get the phrase mystery Babylon from. Could she hypothetically be representing America? Could this be a vision that John saw that was years off into the future? Is it that John is looking into the future? He's being shown this vision, and it's thousands of years away. There's going to be this nation that rises up that's like Babylon the Great, but it's something else. The reason they ask this, most people ask the question, could America be Mystery Babylon, is because they've been taught to read the book of Revelation just like that. Sort of like it's a treasure map, or it's a cipher of future events that they must decode. So John could really be looking at anything in history, going all the way back from his own time, all the way going forward. And a lot of people read this book, Revelation, that way. I used to read this book that way. It was the only way I really knew how to read Revelation. It's the way I assumed we should read it. Like, all these events are about the days that are going to come right before the return of the Lord. We don't know when that could be. It could be our own lifetime that it's referring to. Probably wasn't referring to the lifetime of the people that it was first written to. It's something that's still to come. And so we have to figure out if these events are coming true right now in our own lives, in our own times. This passage in particular is inherently mysterious because of this name on the great prostitute's forehead. It's the name of a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes. Now, while I think that the great prostitute, or mystery Babylon, does certainly represent the spirit of evil empires throughout history, I don't think that it represents America. And there are 2 main reasons why I don't think that Mystery Babylon is or could be America. The first is one I've already sort of led with. I think that most everything in Revelation, at least between, I'll say, verses 6 and 18, fits more squarely into the 1st century than it does into any other time period. I've mentioned many times on this podcast before and on this channel that there are historically 4 ways that Christians have interpreted the book of Revelation throughout church history. In fact, I made a video earlier this year about the 4 ways that Revelation is interpreted, has been interpreted historically. And there's a link to it in the description below if you're watching us on YouTube or Rumble. The 4 ways that Revelation has been historically interpreted are the historicist view, I'll say the historicist interpretation, the futurist interpretation, the preterist interpretation, and the idealist interpretation. Now, out of those 4 ways that Revelation has been historically interpreted, I think that the historicist view can just be pretty much done away with. Basically, the historicist view says that Everything in Revelation is like a roadmap that traces church history. It traces church history. It's not that it's something written for the future and we have to figure out if we're living in the day that it's written about. It's that everything in Revelation represents this roadmap in between the first and second comings of Christ. And that all 7 of the churches that are addressed in the beginning of Revelation represent a specific period of time in church history. That's the historicist view. I mentioned that one specifically because I don't think it has any real actual application in interpreting Revelation. There's no other book that we read like that. Somebody invented this way of interpreting Revelation and thought it sounded good, and it's pretty much been doing nothing but damage in church history ever since it was invented. If Revelation were written that way, we would need some clear indication that that was what God intended, and we have absolutely nothing like that. We would need some clear indication that we are to read this book differently from every other book in the Bible. And that would include other books that are apocalyptic literature that fall within that genre. But the other 3 ways of interpreting Revelation are all valid, in my opinion. The idealist way of interpreting Revelation sees Revelation as more or less this a set of patterns that exist all through church history. The events of Revelation represent the ongoing struggle that exists between good and evil, between God and Satan, between the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of this world. I think when you read Revelation that way, sort of as it's a story that embodies the ongoing struggle between good and evil, you'll get a lot out of it. I also think that the events that are depicted in Revelation applied specifically to the original audience, because everything in the Bible has an original intended message for the original intended audience. And the way many people interpret Revelation today is they read the first couple chapters that's written to the 7 churches of Asia Minor, who were all historical churches in the first century, and they just pluck things out and sort of apply them generally to the church at large. And they miss the fact that everything written to those 7 churches had specific applications to them. And the only way that we can begin to apply them to us is when we understand how our situation is akin to their situations. I talked about this a couple of live streams ago when we talked about the rapture and what the Bible actually says about the rapture of the church, and how there's all sorts of people who point to a verse in Revelation chapter 3 where Jesus is speaking to the church at Philadelphia, and he says, "Because you have kept my word, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world." People say, you see, that verse proves that there's a pre-tribulation rapture. Jesus is going to keep the church from the hour of trial that's coming on the whole world. That verse has nothing to do with the pre-tribulation rapture. How do I know that? Because Jesus is writing to a first century church, and he's telling them specifically and explicitly that he is going to keep them from an hour of trial that was coming on the world then. Now, does that mean that God's not going to keep us from hours of trial that could be coming on the world? No, it doesn't mean that. He does often keep his church from hours of trial that are coming on the world. He preserves his people through times of darkness and travail. But to take a verse like that and just apply it to the church at large for all of time, it's not really honest or fair or fitting within the framework of faithful, proper biblical interpretation. And so I say all that to say, I think that much of Revelation has a specific application for the original audience. Are there ways in which the events of Revelation could repeat themselves in the last days, in the days leading up to the return of Jesus? That is very, very possible, which is why I don't completely discount the futurist view of Revelation. But if you had to ask me, which views do I think are the most useful when interpreting Revelation? Which interpretive methods are the most useful? I would say it's the idealist interpretation, the one that understands that Revelation is depicting maybe not just singular events, but the ongoing battle between God and the kingdom of this world, and also the preterist interpretation of Revelation, the one which understands that the events that are being depicted in the book between chapters 6 and 18 have direct application for the original audience. These are things that happened to them and for them, and they were being written to warn them of what was to come. So how does all this help us, serve us in answering the question, could Mystery Babylon be America? Well, the first reason I don't think that it's right to say that Mystery Babylon in Revelation 17 is America is because America didn't exist when this was first written. And if this is talking about America, then it has absolutely zero application for the original audience. And anywhere in biblical prophecy or in the Bible where there is absolutely zero application for the original audience, God almost always tells them that. Like in Daniel, when he says, put this away, it's for the time of the end. I'm revealing it to you, Daniel, but this part of the prophecy doesn't actually concern you. It concerns a time period where you will no longer be here. So Mystery Babylon, does it really fit with America? I would say no. Now, here's a good question. If we take the futurist and the idealist views of Revelation, could America one day end up being the type of evil empire, like the Roman Empire, that I think is in view here in Revelation 17 when we're talking about the beast with 7 heads? And could America become an empire like that one day? Could America grow into being the type of, we'll just stick with the word we're using, empire that fits into this mold? Well, I don't know what America is going to look like in 100 or 200 years from now. But I will say this, as of today, as of right now, I don't think that America fits with the view of Mystery Babylon that Revelation presents. I don't think it fits with the characteristics or the traits that we see being described in this description of Mystery Babylon, who is the great prostitute, right? When we talk about Mystery Babylon, that's the name that is on the forehead of the great prostitute, who is riding on the back of the 7-headed beast in Revelation chapter 17. Why do I say that this doesn't really fit with America, in my opinion? Well, I think the most obvious reason can be found in verse 6 of Revelation 17. The woman, the great prostitute, aka Mystery Babylon, is drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Now, is America known as a country that persecutes God's people? Is Christian persecution something that we really, really struggle with here in America? Like from our own government? Does the American government persecute Christians? Is America known for killing the saints and the people of God? No, not at all. Not in any way, shape, or form. In fact, America was founded by people whose ancestors left Europe for the explicit reason of fleeing persecution. The first people that came to America from Europe and settled here were Christians who were being persecuted mainly by other types of Christians. And the reason that we have in our founding documents this crystal clear rule, it's the First Amendment, right? Yeah, it's the First Amendment, that Congress shall establish no religion. It's not because the founding fathers and the culture of America at its founding weren't Christian. It's because they didn't ever want there to be an opportunity for certain types of Christians to get power in the government and then dictate what type of Christianity was going to be practiced in America. They didn't want the Catholics to take control of the Senate and force all the Protestants to become Catholic, or vice versa. They wanted everybody in America to be able to worship God in the way that they saw fit. They didn't want any Christians being hung or burned at the stake for not believing in the Trinity or the inerrancy of the Bible or the pre-tribulation rapture. Throw out a doctrine. There's all sorts of things throughout church history, all sorts of doctrines throughout church history that have been used by Christians to persecute other Christians, sadly. And that is what the founders had in view when they separated church and state. If you had told the founders of America, the men who wrote our founding documents, that the lack of official state religion in America meant that in certain parts of America today, there would be Muslims taking over entire cities, having public demonstrations of the Muslim religion of Islam, that there would be the Muslim call to prayer being broadcast in American cities, and Christians in those same cities being told that they were not allowed to publicly express their own religion. If you would have told them that, they would have been shocked and astounded and horrified. I'm sure of that. I'm sure of that. Because even if you want to make the case that America was founded by deists, it's actually much more accurate to say that the founding fathers were more like Christian deists. They were much more Christian in their beliefs than most Christians are today. They were much more conservative Christian than most Christians are today. And there's no doubt that the Bible had a much, much greater impact on the civilization of America than anything else in history. Certainly more than the Enlightenment did, even though lots of people today try to claim that the Enlightenment had more influence on the founding of America than the Bible, which is absolutely untrue and ahistorical, in my opinion. You know, I just got a book that I'm excited to read. I haven't read it yet, so I can't fully endorse it, but it's been recommended to me. It's called The Book That Made Your World, and it's by an Indian Christian, a Christian who is from India. And it's all about how influential the Bible has been in the founding of the West. I'm excited to read it. I think probably there's going to be a lot of good stuff in there. Okay. Now, we say all that. What do I think? I should say, who do I think is represented, or what do I think is represented by this woman, the great prostitute in Revelation 17? If it's not America, who does she represent? If the beast with 7 heads represents the Roman Empire, which I think it probably does, for the people who were first reading this book, when they read about the 7-headed beast, they were thinking, okay, the empire that we're all living under. This was probably written during a time when there had been a succession of emperors, and Rome was known as the city on 7 hills, which is mentioned later on in this chapter. There's all sorts of reasons to believe that the beast represents the empire. So who does the prostitute represent? The prostitute that's riding on her back, on his back, on its back. I think the great prostitute in Revelation 17 probably represents the city of Jerusalem, who earlier in the book, I should say which earlier in the book is referred to as the great city that symbolically is called Sodom and Egypt. That's Revelation 11:8. Now, before you balk and say, what? The great prostitute represents Jerusalem, God's city, the city of the Jewish people, the city where Jesus Christ was killed, the city where Jesus Christ went to worship God at the temple? Yeah, I think that's probably who the great prostitute in Revelation 17, Mystery Babylon, represents. Remember, Jesus said in Matthew 23, not long before he went to the cross, something very important about Jerusalem and the generation of religious Jews who had rejected him as their Messiah. He said that all the righteous blood shed on earth, from righteous Abel, going all the way back to the children of Adam and Eve, from righteous Abel all the way to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, one of the last Jewish prophets of the Old Testament, would fall on them. That's what Jesus said. All the righteous blood shed on earth would fall on the Jewish system and the Jewish people of Jerusalem in that generation. This is what Jesus says in Matthew 23, right before he launches into a prophecy about the destruction of Jerusalem, not one stone being left on top of another. And that was a prophecy that came true. Jesus said it would happen in that very generation, the one who he was speaking to, and it came true in 70 AD. He says that all the righteous blood shed on earth from Abel to Zechariah would come on them. And then he says this to the Jewish religious leaders of Jerusalem and to everybody who was listening as he was leaving the city for the last time. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often I would have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. I think that when we take all this in view, when we read this as something that had, I'm talking about Revelation, the entire book, but specifically chapter 17, that had a direct application to the first century Christians. And when you consider the fact that the great prostitute is drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus, and you ask yourself the question, where was the first Christian martyr killed? Where was the first apostle of Jesus killed? Who was responsible in many ways for the persecution of the church in the first century? Well, Stephen, the first Christian martyr, was killed in Jerusalem. James, the brother of John, the son of Zebedee, the first of Jesus' disciples to be martyred for his faith, was killed in Jerusalem. Most of the Christian persecution in the first century was being incited by the religious people of Jerusalem, by the Jewish people of Judea. When you read about Paul and Cephas or Peter in the book of Galatians having an argument in Antioch about whether or not they should be eating with Gentiles, because there are people who came from Jerusalem and told them, hey, there's all sorts of stuff being stirred up against the church right now. The church is in danger. The church is being persecuted. We need to be careful how we walk. And when you understand that historically, the Jewish people had a very carved out sort of niche within the Roman Empire. They were, despite the fact that they were monotheistic, they were very much, more than any other monotheistic group, they were left alone by the Romans. They weren't being forced or compelled to honor Roman religion. And so when this group of Christians pops up, when this new sect within Judaism pops up, and these people are running around all over the empire telling people, there's another king. Yeah, I'm Jewish. There's another king. There's a Messiah named Jesus. You understand that so much of the persecution in the first century of the church was incited and was being actively incited by the Jews of Jerusalem. Saul himself was a Jewish Pharisee on his way to arrest Christians when he met the Lord on the road to Damascus. And that so much of the earliest Christian blood that was spilt in Jerusalem. And the reason it was spilt, whether it was the Jews themselves who did the killing, in the case of Stephen, it was the religious Jews who stoned him, or it was because the Jewish people were inciting people like Herod, the son of Herod the Great, to martyr James, the son of Zebedee, the brother of John. This is all coming from one place. It's not all coming from one place, but there's a hub. The reason that Christians were taking the gospel all over the empire, at least in one way, is because they were fleeing persecution in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem. And Jesus predicted this. He said it was going to happen. He told the people of Jerusalem, what was going to happen to them and to their city as a result of their rejection of him. And he did not mince words. And it wasn't just Jerusalem. There were cities all throughout Judea, cities that Jesus grew up in, that he cursed during his ministry because they rejected him. Woe to you, Bethsaida. Woe to you, Chorazin. Woe to you. If the one who was sent to you would have been sent to a city like Sodom, they would have repented by now. The men of Sodom will rise up with the generation of judgment and will condemn you, because the one who was sent to you was greater than any message that was ever sent to them. You see this theme that we see all through the New Testament? And in Revelation 11, the city where our Lord was killed is referred to as Sodom. This is the place where Christian persecution was most active in the first century. Now, look, I need to be clear about one thing. There's all sorts of stuff going on in the world right now with modern day Israel. And there's all sorts of, it seems like, conspiracies and, fodder being brought up against the Jewish people. And I am not speaking to any of that right now. This has nothing to do with current events. It has nothing to do with the modern state of Israel. It has nothing to do with Jewish people today. I am not saying anything. I do not want to inflame any conspiracies or any theories that are currently going on about Jewish people, Israel, the Jews, none of that. I'm talking specifically about the first century context of the New Testament and the book of Revelation. And I think when we're talking about who the great prostitute is, it's not America, it's Jerusalem. And she's sitting on the back of the beast with 7 heads, which represents the Roman Empire. And together, they were persecuting God's church in the first century. The beast was being incited by the prostitute to go out and kill Christians, which is why the prostitute herself is drunk with the blood of the martyrs. That's who I think the great prostitute probably represents in the book of Revelation. One more thing I'll say about this. In Galatians 4, Paul compares present-day Jerusalem, the Jerusalem of the first century, with Mount Sinai and with the son of Hagar. Hagar was the slave woman who Abraham married. He had a son with her, even though he was not the son of promise. He's referred to as the son of the flesh because Abraham was trying to bring God's promises about using his own natural means. And God always, the whole time, planned on doing it through his wife, Sarah. God was not going to fulfill his promise to Abraham apart from Abraham's wife. He was just waiting for them to be barren so that he could do it supernaturally. Anyway, this person, the son of Hagar, Ishmael, is compared with Mount Sinai. The son of the slave woman, whom Abraham impregnated, I said that, and he calls it, by extension, he compares both of these, Ishmael and Mount Sinai, with the Jewish system of that day. And he refers to it as the son of the flesh who persecuted the one born according to the Spirit, Galatians 4:29. Please go and read this for yourself. Don't just take my word for it. I might be butchering it a little bit too in my explanation. In other words, this is what Paul's saying in Galatians 4. He's saying present day Judaism and the Jewish people, the people who have rejected Christ, citizens of modern day Jerusalem, not those who belong to Christ, but the ones who are rejecting him and actively persecuting his church. They belong to Jerusalem, and that Jerusalem is a house of bondage, like Mount Sinai, which represents the law, the old covenant, the covenant that Paul says is like a covenant of death, a covenant of bondage. But being a member of the heavenly Jerusalem, i.e., God's family, God's kingdom, the church, right? We don't look for an earthly city. We look for a heavenly one. Paul does this juxtaposition between modern day Jerusalem, which is a house of bondage, and heavenly Jerusalem, which is God's kingdom, the one that's coming. He says being a part of God's kingdom is like being a child of promise. It's like being Isaac as opposed to Ishmael, who persecuted the son of promise. The son of the flesh persecuted the child of promise. All that to say, in Paul's mind, in Galatians 4, he's clear. Jerusalem and Judaism no longer represents what it used to. And as I've said often on this show, people like to make a big deal about Jerusalem and about the land. And I'm not saying anything about Israel shouldn't be in the land. I believe Israel has a right to be in the land. But theologically, from a New Testament perspective, is there anything special about Jerusalem itself? Well, all of Jesus's predictions about its destruction came true. And the last thing he told his disciples before he ascended was this: all authority in heaven and on earth is mine. Go and make disciples of all nations. In other words, the entire earth is being brought under subjection, under the lordship of Christ. It's not about a single place anymore. That was a type and a shadow of the fact that everywhere a Christian walks today is holy ground. So these are things to keep in mind when we ask these questions. When we answer these questions, I do not personally think that the great prostitute, mystery Babylon in Revelation 17 could be America. I don't think that America is even mentioned anywhere in the Bible. I think that the great prostitute more likely represented, to the original readers of this book, Jerusalem, and that the beast that she's riding on represented the Roman Empire. Okay, I'm going to answer the next question, but before I do, I'm going to take a quick 55-second break. Don't go anywhere. I'll be back in less than 60 seconds. Hey, if you're enjoying this content, I want to encourage you to visit our website, thatyoumayknowhim.com. There you will find all of our past videos, all of our past podcast episodes, and our podcast series cataloged and categorized, as well as our blog, Coffee with God, where you'll find Bible studies, devotions, and biblical and theological articles, all for free. We don't charge for anything whatsoever on our website. I started this ministry back in 2021, and if you feel led to do so, we would love your support. Every little bit helps. $20 a month, $10 a month, even $5 a month goes a long way to helping us accomplish our mission of illuminating biblical truth, applying it to faith, life, and culture, so that you can know and love and walk with Jesus like never before. So question number 2 today is on the subject of capital punishment. And this is kind of a long question. And since there's inherent in the question, there seems to be some family drama, I'm going to leave names completely out of it. I'll just read it to you as it was sent to me. It goes like this. The subject of capital punishment came up in a recent conversation with my family. My niece said that it was anti-Christian. My brother said that it was not anti-Christian, referencing Romans 13:4, where Apostle Paul says that the authorities do not wield the sword in vain. I agreed with my brother, adding Genesis 9:6, where God told Noah, whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. My sister, who is a progressive pastor, replied that Genesis is Old Covenant, but Jesus said, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. I don't like to see my family divided, but most importantly, I want to understand the biblical truth. Was capital punishment only for the Old Testament? If so, what did Paul mean by saying that the authorities do not bear the sword in vain? Any biblical illumination you can offer would be much appreciated. All right, so this is a layered question. I'm excited to answer it the best I can. I must say right off the bat to the questioner that I agree, like you do, with your brother. That Romans chapter 13, it's like verses, well, let's just flip over here. Verses 1 through 7 give us the template for how we should think about things from a societal, governmental perspective when it comes to things like capital punishment. There is a massive difference, and people seem to forget this often, or maybe they don't even realize it, but there's a massive difference between following Jesus as a private citizen and honoring God as a righteous government. And that goes for democratic republics, democracies, monarchies, whatever type of government we're talking about. It would be a little simpler if you were a monarch. Let's just say there was a country out there today that was a Christian monarchy. It would be much simpler for a God-fearing ruler to sit down with spiritual counsel and the Bible and say, okay, how do I rule righteously? How do I rule by honoring God? How does justice prevail in the land? As opposed to, say, a group of people coming together and trying to work together to form righteous laws and a just government, which is what I believe our founding fathers tried to do. But either way, it's different when you're part of government to follow Jesus and to honor God. There's like a different set of standards and there's a different set of protocols than if you're a private citizen and an individual who is trying to follow Jesus. And I'll give you a perfect example. Jesus said, love your enemies. He said, if someone strikes you on one cheek, turn the other cheek. Jesus was very clearly, when speaking with his disciples, nonviolent, right? He did not believe that his disciples on a personal level should return violence with violence, evil for evil. But as a father, as a husband, does that mean that if someone is threatening or attacking or violating my wife, my child, Jesus wouldn't want me to protect them, defend them if I have the power to do so? I don't think it means that at all. There are times in the New Testament where Jesus tells his disciples, hey, when you go out preaching the gospel, evangelizing, don't take a sword with you. Don't take a sword, cloak, money bag, none of it. Leave it all at home. And there's a time toward the end of his ministry when he knows things are about to change where he says, hey, if you don't have a sword, buy one because you're going to need it because things are going to be different. Was Jesus advocating for Christians to be violent? To go and win the world for Christ by force? No, he wasn't. Was he advocating for Christians to, if you're in a situation where someone tries to pick a fight with you as a Christian over your Christian beliefs, you should just throw your glove, just go to blows if you have the power to do so. Just fight, defend yourself. I don't think so. But would Jesus advocate for Christians allowing other Christians to be harmed, hurt, killed for the simple reason that they're in the world and there's evil people around? And, let's just say we're in a totally, set apart situation. Like what I'm saying is we're not evangelizing. We're not out witnessing. We're not doing any of this stuff. We're just at home, minding our own business. And someone comes in to rob the house, to rape your wife, and to murder your children. Does Christian nonviolence mean not do anything in that situation? Don't defend them? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It does not mean that at all, in my opinion. All I'm trying to say is there are different levels that you have to consider. There's different situations we have to put ourselves in. We can't just take something Jesus said to his disciples that applies to specific situations and try to mass apply it to Christians everywhere at all times. And when it comes to righteous government, it's very different than following Jesus and being committed to pacifism and nonviolence as a disciple of Jesus Christ. So let me get to the question specifically. Your sister is right that Genesis is part of the Torah. Remember, in the question, questioner says, my sister, who's a progressive pastor, replied that Genesis is old covenant, but Jesus said, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. She's right that Genesis is old covenant, but what does she mean by that exactly? Because the passage that you're referring to, Genesis chapter 9, verse 6, is one in which God makes a covenant with Noah. And Noah was representative in that covenant of all humanity. This wasn't a covenant with Israel or Abraham. This predates that. This is before all that. This is the first covenant God makes with all of humanity after he floods the earth, and he promises he would never destroy the earth that way again. There's not many conditions placed on it. It's just like, hey, God says to Noah, you go be fruitful and multiply. I'm never going to flood the earth again and destroy humanity in this way. As far as I understand, that covenant still stands. And when God replaces this earth with a new one, it's not going to be by via flood waters. It says this earth, and it says in Peter, this earth's going to burn up and be quenched, and it's going to be replaced by a new one that's going to come down out of heaven. That's a whole other topic. So what exactly does she mean by saying that God's covenant with Noah is old covenant? It's in the Old Testament, but is she saying that even that covenant has been superseded by the new covenant? Because I don't think that they're really linked. I don't think there's a single place where Paul talks about the new covenant replacing the old covenant or the old covenant passing away, where he has the covenant God made with Noah in view. What he has in view is the covenant God made with Moses most of the time. And the covenant that God made with Abraham, he depicts as being fulfilled in Christ. The promises made to Abraham's offspring were made to Christ and are fulfilled and given in Christ. Honestly speaking, it sounds to me like your sister, the progressive pastor, and maybe your niece too, suffer from what I call PDS. I could be presuming here, but it sounds like they suffer from what I call PDS, which is Pauline derangement syndrome. Lots of progressive Christians suffer from PDS, Pauline derangement syndrome. What is Pauline derangement syndrome? There's this severe mischaracterization in people's minds that Jesus was this lovey-dovey, gentle creature who didn't ever say anything harsh or wish judgment on anyone. He was just loving and kind and gentle and always nonviolent and never, ever, ever wanted any harm. He just didn't matter if you were like the most righteous person in the world, or if you were like the devil incarnate. He treated everybody the same. Just love them all, just accept them all, just affirm their actions. It's all good, man. I'm not here to ruffle any feathers. I'm not here to push any buttons. I tolerate everyone. That is a false picture of Jesus Christ. That's not who he was at all. So there's this mischaracterization that Jesus was this lovey-dovey, gentle, sort of effeminate man, and that Paul was this mean, harsh, Pharisaical teacher of some other brand of Christianity than the one that Jesus taught. And this is what I call Pauline derangement syndrome. And nothing could be further from the truth. I'll never forget my last semester of seminary, sitting in a Greek exegesis of Romans class with a New Testament scholar for a professor. And everybody, and this particular professor didn't really like to share his opinion much. He usually let the class dialogue and debate. Once in a while, he would sort of come in and try to land the plane, but usually he just let things lie where they landed. And I'll never forget this day where people are getting into this debate about, is Paul mean? Is Paul legalistic? Is Paul saying these things that, go against what Jesus said? And the professor finally spoke up and he's like, it seems like you all think that Jesus was some nice guy and Paul's super mean. I would suggest you go back and reread the Gospels, because Jesus says way more harsh things than Paul ever does, by far. You just have a mischaracterization of Jesus in your mind because he delivered the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus said some of the harshest things in the New Testament. I quoted some of them earlier when he spoke against Jerusalem and told them that judgment was coming upon them within that very generation. He told his disciples to love their enemies. He also tells us more about hell than any other biblical character. Most of what we know about hell comes directly out of the mouth of Jesus in the Gospels. He said that those who hurt, harm, or cause children to sin would be better off having never been born at all, because they're going to suffer for what they did. That's just one example of the types of things that Jesus said during his life. You see, this question and this topic really has to do with God's character, which is what's under attack. Progressive Christians want a God who's loving, but they don't want a God who's just. And sadly, what they fail to realize is that if you don't have a God who's both loving and just, he's neither one. If God is not just, he is not loving. If he were not loving, he would not be just. You don't get one without the other. They go together always. He's merciful, he's gracious, and his justice will ultimately prevail. That's what we're going to have when we live in a perfect world where there's no sin. The scandal of the gospel is that anyone can be forgiven and redeemed through faith, but it's not so we can stay the same. It's not so that we can stay sinful, vengeful, unrighteous, unjust, unloving, ungracious people. It's so that we can be transformed into righteous image bearers. And this is what progressive Christianity misses every time they preach tolerance and acceptance of all things over the holiness that the real gospel presents and offers to people. The Bible says that Jesus Christ has become for us wisdom and righteousness and sanctification and redemption. That word sanctification is the word holiness. He has become justification and holiness for us. To present a gospel where we offer salvation, but we don't offer holiness and transformation, that's not a real gospel. That's a fake gospel. So progressive Christians who want to just be known as these tolerant, all-inclusive, everything goes sorts of people are not representing Jesus Christ. And what does this have to do with capital punishment? Well, Christians really need to think a little more deeply about this topic. If I were ever to be put in a position of leadership, I would be responsible for a whole other set of standards when I stand before God one day than I am as a private citizen, single disciple who's following Jesus. Okay, how I react to violence, how I react when I'm attacked as a private citizen, as a disciple of Jesus is totally different than when I stand before God as someone who's been put in the position of authority and he says, what did you do about the person who attacked a righteous Christian in your society? What did you do about the man who was consistently raping women? What did you do about the person who was murdering people day after day after day? Did you accept them? Did you tolerate them? Or did you show forth my justice? Did you let justice reign? Did you bring justice? Did you defend the innocent and the oppressed? You see, people who think this way usually love to quote passages from the Old Testament about how God loves the oppressed and the widow and the orphan, and he cares for them because he does. But then you turn it around and they say things like, but capital punishment isn't Christian. Who do you think God was speaking against in those Old Testament prophets when he was talking about the fact that the widow and the orphan and the oppressed were being taken advantage of? By who? By evil people. But now you're saying that there should be no accountability for the evil that they do. That's a contradiction. And so I've always, for many, many years, tried to recognize this when I think about who I vote for. The question I'm asking myself is not who, best embodies what I perceive to be, the Christian, Christian tenets. Patience. Some people value patience, long-suffering, gentleness, kindness, mercy. Others look more for values like justice, strength, courage, fortitude. All those things are God. All those are godly attributes. It's rare that you find all of them in a single person. Christ is actually the one that embodies all of them perfectly. But you have to pick and choose when you're voting who you think embodies the most godly characteristics. And when it comes to how they're going to rule and lead in government, that matters. That's why I think it's crazy to me. As an individual Christian, I care about people who are oppressed, who are poor, who are downtrodden. And it's my job and responsibility to go and help those people to the best of my ability. But to think that as a Christian, I should criticize or attack a government or people in government for enforcing laws that our country has instituted, that the people have voted on, that baffles my mind. How could you criticize a government official, let's just say it. How could you criticize a president for enforcing the laws that our government has established? You should be criticizing the ones who don't enforce the laws. If you don't like the laws, then try to have them changed. But don't criticize the people who enforce them. These are the types of things you have to think about when you think about issues like this. And to say that because Jesus was nonviolent, that Christian pacifism is a good thing in many situations, at the cost of saying, well, like without considering the fact that one of the government's main jobs, according to Scripture, is to enforce justice in the land, that the way that someone in leadership, that a government can lift up the oppressed person, can lift up the downtrodden, is by protecting them from the ones who do them harm. The way that God's justice is doled out on a societal level is, hey, you murder, you rape, you steal, you don't have the right to do those things. And you will pay the penalty if you do them. If you take someone's life, then you're going to be executed for it. Now, can I forgive someone on a personal level who's done those things? Absolutely. Can God forgive them? Does God forgive people who come to him in faith? Absolutely. But that's different than justice being wielded on the earth and justice rolling down like waters rolling down from the mountains. And so do I think that capital punishment is Christian? Yeah, according to Romans 13, I absolutely do. And this is what it says. Romans 13:1, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. For he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Who sets up nations and governments and kingdoms according to the Bible? According to specifically the book of Daniel, chapter 2, I believe. God does. God does. And one of the reasons God does it is so that the earth is not completely run amok by people who are lawless. The idea of total anarchy is not one. That idea doesn't come from God. And that would never work in the world. If you want to know what total anarchy looks like, just go back and read about the world before the flood. Because that world quickly disintegrated into total anarchy, and it was not a pretty picture. So God sets up rulers and he takes rulers down. And the reason that governments are in control, the reason that governments exist, the reason that there's structure in society, according to God's standard, is to keep terror from ruining the lot, to keep terror from running amok, to keep those who would terrorize others from having control and the ability to terrorize anyone who's weaker than them. So those who wield the sword do it with a purpose. And when a Christian, the only time a Christian is permitted to go against Romans 13 is when they are being asked or compelled by a government to go against their own conscience. And in that case, a Christian should go against their government. But when it comes to capital punishment, I don't think it's right or biblical to say that it's not Christian or that it's not biblical. I think it absolutely is. Okay, last question of the day, and then I'll turn to the chat. This one's going to be real quick. It comes from Ben, who says, I recently listened to your live stream on the rapture and was wondering what to do with 1 Thessalonians 1:10. A person from my Bible study said it was the only proof I need of the pre-tribulation rapture. Actually, Ben, it's the only proof you need of how preferable the pre-trib rapture doctrine is. It's not strong. You can poke holes in it every which way to Sunday because as I said in that live stream, as I demonstrated in that live stream, there is nothing in the Bible that teaches a pre-tribulation rapture. In fact, it's the opposite. 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 10. Do I have that? No, I don't. Let me pull it up real quick. 1 Thessalonians 1:10. I'll start in verse 9. It says this, for they themselves report concerning us the kind of reception we had among you, and how you turned to God from idols to serve the living and true God, and to wait for his Son from heaven, who he raised from the dead, Jesus, who delivers us from the wrath to come. There's 1 Thessalonians 1:10. To wait for his Son from heaven, who he raised from the dead, Jesus, who delivers us from the wrath to come. Not only is there nothing in this verse about the rapture, there's also nothing about the tribulation. For 1,800 years of biblical interpretation, the word wrath, which is used right here in verse 10, it's the Greek word orge. The Greek word orge. The word wrath was understood to be a reference to the wrath of God that is coming on the world at the final judgment, which is what the word is a reference to almost everywhere it's used in the New Testament. It's only dispensationalism that has tried to turn this word, wrath, orge, into something it's not, which is a reference to the Great Tribulation. The word tribulation in the New Testament is the Greek word 𝗪𝙤. 𝗪𝙤. The word wrath and the word tribulation, orge and 𝗪𝙤, are not interchangeable. But as I said in that live stream, if someone wants to believe that this is evidence of the pre-tribulation rapture, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? There's nothing in here about the pre-tribulation rapture. There's nothing in here even about the rapture. As I stated in that live stream, when I walked you through various passages, when you read the Bible in context, you'll see that there is no distinction made between the catching up of the saints and the coming of the Lord. They're all one event. They're part of one singular event. And like I said, this word wrath is almost always a reference to the wrath of God that's coming on the world at the coming of Jesus when he judges the living and the dead. That's what we're delivered from. We're not delivered from tribulation in this life. So just ask your friend, where do you see the rapture or the Great Tribulation in this passage? Where do you see that? Better yet, ask the man from your Bible study if he wants to do a Bible study together on the Greek word orge, which is the word wrath, and go look at all the places it's used and see how it's used and see how often it's a reference to the Great Tribulation. I don't think he'll probably do that with you. If he does, that'd be great. Even then, I'm not sure you're going to change his mind. Okay, let me breeze through the comments here. I see we got some conversation going on about criticizing government people. Yeah, like I said, Casper, the whole point of saying what I said about not criticizing the government for enforcing laws is the government exists to enforce. One of the reasons the government exists in a righteous society is to enforce laws. If you don't like the laws, then try to change the laws. But don't don't criticize the government for enforcing the laws. I mean, how would you like it if the government if a sitting president decided to say, you know what, we are not going to enforce murder anymore. You can murder whoever you want. We're not going to prosecute anyone for murder. So just so everybody knows, we don't want anyone to murder, but we're not going to prosecute anybody for murder or theft. Would you be happy with that? I wouldn't be happy with that. I wouldn't want to change those laws. I would be really upset that the government is not enforcing those laws. When they don't enforce laws that are on the books, they're not doing their job. When they do enforce laws that are on the books, they are doing their job. So for a government to enforce laws that are on the books and for you to criticize them for that I think your criticism is pointed at the wrong place. If you don't like the laws that are on the books, criticize the laws and try to change them. But don't criticize the president or the ruling authority who's enforcing the laws. This is a republic. The people vote on these things. We vote on representatives who then make laws. There's ways to influence laws in this country and the changing of laws and the writing of laws. It's through your Congress people, senators, and then the way laws are interpreted, that goes into the judicial branch. But I don't think it's right to criticize a government official, a president, for enforcing laws that are on the books. That's his job, his or her job. I can't follow everything that you're saying here. So please address my former statement about Pol Pot. Yeah, I don't know what your former statement was, but I don't think there's any other comments in the chat or questions. So I think we're going to call it a day. This has been fun. Bible Q&A. We talked about Mystery Babylon. We talked about capital punishment, which I definitely think fits with a Christian worldview. Definitely according to Romans 13. And at the very end, we talked about... sorry, everyone who's watching or listening. I'm looking in the chat. Okay, here we go. Now a question just popped through. I got one more question. What about governments that are evil? Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot. Does God condone? No, God does not. As I said before, Christians have an obligation to speak up against evil governments. But when you live in a country like the one we live in, where you have laws on the books. Okay, like let's take this for example. If Hitler said there's a new law, we're just going to go ahead and kill all the Jewish people. That's inherently wrong. That is inherently wrong to just kill people for their race. You should criticize the law inherently. The law is wrong. Of course, you're going to criticize the person who's enforcing the law, who made the law, because it's an evil law. But I mean, that's like a whole nother situation we're talking about. When you have dictators and people that are, in the case of the Nazi Empire, they were probably a fitting example, a fitting embodiment of the template in Revelation 17 of an evil empire. They were literally trying to take over the world, just like the Roman Empire was doing. They were trying to conquer peoples and nations and cultures. I don't see America going that way. I mean, maybe one day, many years from now, America is going to be a place, an empire that's trying to take over the entire world. I don't think that's what most Americans want. I don't think that's what anybody in our current administration wants, for America to become an empire that's trying to dominate the world. Last I checked, the president currently wants peace everywhere, and he's becoming known as a person who finds a way to get peace. But when we're talking about criticizing a government for enforcing laws in a situation like ours, which is a democratic republic, Trump isn't writing any laws. He's not making any laws. He's enforcing the laws that are on the books. I think you should deal with the law. If you start criticizing presidents for enforcing the law, where does that end up? And where does it end? You're always going to be fighting with a person instead of the root cause. And the root cause in that situation is, if the law itself is corrupt, then try to change the law. But like I said, if you had a president come along and say, we are no longer going to enforce the laws against murder, you wouldn't be taking issue with the law. You would be taking issue with the person, because that law is a good law. So what I'm saying is, in situations where good laws that are already on the books are being enforced, don't criticize the people who are enforcing them. Change the laws. If you don't think the laws are righteous, seek to change them. Am I making sense? I think I am. But anyone can push back if they want to. Send us an email or join us for our next Bible Q&A if you want to do that. I'm going to sign off for now. It's been a lot of fun. Until next time, stay blessed, live loved, and thank you for watching and listening to That You May Know Him. Thanks for watching. My name is Blake, and over the past 20 years, I've been a missionary, a pastor, and a Bible college and seminary professor. During that entire time, I've been teaching the Bible. And if you want more Bible content to come your way, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and like this video. And also, check out this video right here.